He had finally found peace, a new home, a quiet neighborhood, and the life he'd worked so hard to build. But peace doesn't last long when prejudice lives next door. It started with the stares, the whispers. Then came the confrontation. Moments later, she was on the phone with 911, twisting the truth to fit her fears. But what she didn't know was that the woman on the other end of that line had a very personal reason to listen closely. Because this time, justice was already on the call. David had worked his whole life to get here. A quiet home in a peaceful neighborhood, the kind of place he once dreamed of raising a family. After years in the army and long shifts at the hospital, he finally had it. A front porch, a garden, and neighbors who waved in the mornings. Most of them, anyway. When he first moved in, he noticed one woman who never waved back. She lived 2 houses down, always watching through her curtains. The kind who measured everyone else's life by her own rules. Her name was Linda, head of the HOA, and she'd made it clear from the start that David didn't quite fit in. Still, David tried to ignore it. He mowed his lawn, paid his dues, and kept to himself. His wife, Tasha, worked nights as a 911 dispatcher, a job that kept her grounded, even when the world outside wasn't fair. Together, they'd built a life defined by patience and quiet strength. But on that warm afternoon, as David unloaded boxes from his truck and waved at a passing neighbor, he noticed Linda standing at the edge of her driveway, phone in hand, eyes sharp with suspicion. It wasn't the first time she'd watched him like that. But this time, something in her stare told him it wouldn't end with just words. The first few weeks passed quietly after that strange stare from Linda. David told himself he was overthinking it. After all, not every neighbor had to be friendly. But the signs began to pile up. Notices from the HOA appeared on his door. Complaints about his lawn height, the color of his shutters, even the placement of his garbage bins. All minor things, yet somehow only his house seemed to be under constant review. When he tried to address it calmly, Linda brushed him off with a tight smile and a sharp tone. "We just have standards here," she said. "I'm sure you understand." But the look in her eyes said otherwise. It wasn't about standards. It was about him. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Saturday morning, the sun high and bright, and David was outside fixing a loose fence post. Music played softly from a speaker, the smell of fresh-cut grass filling the air. A peaceful day until Linda appeared again, walking her dog right up to his property line. She stopped, arms crossed, her phone already in hand. "Excuse me," she said loudly, her voice sharp enough to draw attention. "Do you even live here?" David froze, wiping sweat from his brow. "Yes, ma'am, I do. Is there a problem?" Her lips tightened. "You can't be here without permission. This is private property." Something inside him sank. He could feel the eyes of nearby neighbors peering through blinds, watching, silent. He tried to reason with her, to stay calm. But she had already started dialing. 911, "What's your emergency?" Her tone changed instantly. Fake fear, trembling voice. "There's a suspicious man in my neighborhood. He's refusing to leave. I think he's dangerous." David's chest tightened as he realized what was happening. The words "suspicious man" were the oldest weapon in the book. One that didn't need proof, just prejudice. Within minutes, the wail of sirens echoed down the street. He could feel his heart pounding, not from guilt but from the memory of what these moments often led to. He stood still, hands visible, trying to breathe. Across the street, Linda smirked, clutching her dog's leash as the patrol cars turned the corner. But as the first officer stepped out and pressed his radio to his shoulder, David caught something in his tone. Confusion. Then a pause. The dispatcher's voice came over the radio, calm but firm. And David recognized it instantly. The patrol cars screeched to a stop, lights flashing against the neat row of houses. David stood frozen in his driveway, his hands raised, the sound of his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. He could see Linda standing proudly beside the officers, her voice trembling with fake fear as she pointed toward him. "There, he's the one. He threatened me," she cried. The first officer stepped closer, hand resting on his holster. "Sir, we got a report of a disturbance." I'm going to need you to step away from the vehicle. David's voice was calm but tight. Officer, I live here. You can check the deed, my ID. But the words barely mattered. He had seen this before. Good men explaining themselves to those who had already decided not to listen. His chest tightened, his throat dry. Then, through the officer's radio, a voice came through. Calm, steady, familiar. Unit 24, this is dispatch. Confirm address and description. David's heart stopped. That voice. He knew it anywhere. Black male, mid-30s, standing in driveway. The officer replied. A short pause crackled through the air. Then, copy that, Unit 24. That's my husband. He lives there. There's no threat. Please stand down. The silence that followed was deafening. The officer's hand dropped from his holster, his face turning pale. Linda's smug expression faltered, confusion washing over her like a cold wave. Your husband? The officer repeated into his radio. The dispatcher's voice came again, this time firmer. Yes, and I have the HOA president on record making multiple false reports. You might want to double-check who's causing the disturbance. David lowered his hands slowly, his breath shaky but controlled. For the first time, Linda had no words. Her power, her performance, had collapsed in the space of a single radio call. And yet, as David stood there, heart pounding, he knew this wasn't just about her. It was about every moment that led to this one, and the millions who never got their voice on the other end of the line. When the officers finally left, the flashing lights faded, but the weight of what had happened didn't. The neighborhood, once silent, now buzzed with whispers behind half-closed blinds. Linda avoided his gaze as she retreated into her home, clutching her dog and her pride. For the first time, her authority had met accountability. David stood in the middle of his driveway, the air thick with everything that almost went wrong. He should have felt relief, but all he felt was exhaustion. It wasn't just about one false call. It was about the hundreds that came before it, the stories that didn't end with someone on the other end of the line who cared enough to speak up. That night, Tasha came home from her shift and wrapped her arms around him. They didn't need words. They both knew what could have happened, how close he had come to becoming another name, another headline. But for once, the truth had been heard in time. A week later, Linda received a formal warning from the HOA board. It didn't undo the fear she caused, but it was a start. David went back to tending his garden, greeting neighbors, and living his life the only way he knew how, with quiet strength. Yet, beneath that calm, he carried a truth that burned deeper than anger. That peace shouldn't depend on luck or a familiar voice answering a desperate call. Because not every man gets that second chance. Not every story ends with justice catching up. So the question remains, how many more calls will it take before the world stops mistaking black existence for suspicion? He didn't raise his voice. He didn't fight back. He simply stood his ground. And this time, the truth stood with him. But for so many others, that call ends differently. Racism isn't always loud. Sometimes, it sounds like fear pretending to be concern. If the story moved you, share it. Talk about it. Because silence only protects the problem. Subscribe for more real-life stories that reveal the truth we can't ignore. Because every story deserves to be heard, and every voice deserves to be answered.